So, welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. I'm Nina Roesner, and I'm here with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. We're going to be digging into why setting boundaries is super important for your health and well being. Now, this is a really tough topic for a lot of people. They don't know what boundaries are, they don't know where they go. Some people still think they're a fence. There's a lot of confusion around the topic, but we do know that they're biblical and they change relationships. And if you don't do this well, guess what? Your relationship is not going to thrive. It's not going to be all it can be. And I'm not talking about, recruiting you to the military. I'm talking about the plan that God has for your marriage and your life and your family and all these things. So it's just an awesome opportunity that people miss out on. Before we launch into this, I want to give you just a little bit of hope. We have a number of people that do coaching with us, and had a client last week that basically said, I've been doing the respect thing. I've been taking care of myself, but it wasn't till I implemented boundaries that my marriage changed. And it was a 180-degree difference in a month.
Wow.
So yeah, wow, indeed. Like praise God for that. And she's cool. She's a beautiful, kind, gentle woman. And the way she implemented these things was respectful. And within a month, things were different. So I just want to encourage people, because some people are like, oh, that didn't work for me. Let's just dig into this topic a little bit and figure that out. And if you want to go over to our website, greaterimpactwives.org, you can grab a free PDF and learn more about how to deal with walking on eggshells in your relationship. So if you're doing that, you probably don't have any boundaries. So let's dive into this topic today. Kyle, thank you
Hey,
for
hey,
bringing this
hey.
forth today. This is a great subject.
It is. And it gets a lot of airtime when it comes to, buzzwords and hot topics and things like that. But to me, it kind of is in the category of the topic of forgiveness, and that people talk about it a lot, but they don't know very much about it really when you get down to brass tacks. We talk about how forgiveness is so important and such an imperative for us to move forward in life, and then it's like, okay, well, how do I do that?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
is forgiveness really all about? And I think they're probably, and I'm gonna throw this out there, and I may get barbecued for it, but I'm gonna say very specifically in the Christian community, there are a lot of people who talk a lot about forgiveness, and they really don't understand what forgiveness is and what it's
True.
all about. Boundaries are similar
Hmm.
because, like I said, they've in the last several years been getting a lot of airtime, a lot of book titles, and things like that. But you still hear people say, you know what, if a marriage is strong, if it's a good, healthy marriage, then boundaries aren't necessary, or it you shouldn't have to have boundaries if your marriage is good, if your marriage is strong, if you're in a good relationship, that you know boundaries shouldn't be an issue.
Hmm.
And I say, au contraire. I beg to differ.
Yeah.
And I think most people in our line of work
Hmm.
who, have a clue are going to say the same thing. Boundaries are essential for literally every part of our life that involves other people, and even parts that don't.
Yeah,
We have to set boundaries sometimes for ourselves and with ourselves. Because a
that's fair.
boundary, if you think about it, is let's think of it as a fence.
Hmm.
And it's either there to keep something out that we don't want in, or to keep something in that we don't want out.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I have to set boundaries for myself, it's because the things that are outside wanting to come in, uh, I'm not that good at protecting myself.
Hmm.
And so I have to be very intentional about that. And then there are all kinds of things that I don't need to go wandering into. So sometimes being locked in is a good thing.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff we don't actually need to experience to know that it's not good.
Yeah,
Like, we don't need to try heroin to know that we shouldn't use heroin.
true that.
Just saying. Yeah.
True
Yeah.
that. But I think it's really good for us at times to sit down and just kind of talk about the bones, of some of the things we tend to talk about a lot and maybe aren't as zeroed in on as we think we are.
Hmm.
And it's easy to think that setting a boundary just means telling people, well, this is what I need or what I want, and you have to abide by it. And poof, it's all done.
I thought that at first myself. Um, you know, I started with the bra burning statement of "you can't talk to me like that." That, yeah, so that's not a boundary. That's a,
Right.
yeah. But I've learned this was years ago, so I'm not as I don't know what the word is there, ugly as I was about it. It's all actually really calm. So let's dig into this. What do you think is the first thing people need to know about this topic?
Well, I'm gonna list off four things real quick, and we'll go back and hit
Okay.
them. And then there's another little list I want to add before we're done if we have time to do it today. But the first thing is that boundaries mean establishing clear limits, and I really want to focus on the word limits. The second thing is that we need to establish some assertiveness in able to advocate for those needs. And a lot of people have trouble with that. And it has to do with sometimes the dynamics of the relationship and the strength of the personalities in that relationship. Because when you have two strong personalities, becoming assertive suddenly often turns into being aggressive.
Oh yeah.
And someone setting boundaries can set that off actually
Hmm.
without that being the intent. Setting boundaries, it means changing established patterns of behavior. And usually, when we do that in a relationship, it is met with resistance and pushback. Because it's going to appear to somebody else that you're feeling the need to set a boundary, and that's pointing the finger at me.
Yeah.
And so they're going to instantly become defensive and push back a bit on that. And then setting boundaries, like anything else in a relationship, any other skill that we might feel like we need to be building is going to require practice and consistency uh, and maintenance. We got to learn it. We got to practice it. We have to learn how to get better at it, and then we have to maintain it, just like we would anything that's worthwhile. So establishing clear limits, being assertive to advocate for your own needs, understanding that established patterns of behavior are being changed, and they're not always going to be appreciated by everybody involved, in the practice and consistency thing.
So talk
So
about limits. Yeah.
limits. Yeah.
Limits.
Well, it's interesting because that is the first thing that we need to understand about a boundary is that limits need to be present, or is it really a boundary?
Mm.
Okay. Usually a boundary means too much of something from someone for my comfort or my health.
Hmm.
So I need to limit what they do, say, the impact that they have on my daily uh, routine or health.
Hmm.
And the other side of that is maybe I need to set a boundary that limits me. A lot of people have to set boundaries, like you said. It was said in jest about, we don't have to be told real specifically that, putting heroin in our body is not a good thing. But once you've done it,
Yeah.
or once you are tempted to do it, then limits with yourself are things that have to be set.
Hmm.
It's not fair for me to ask other people to accept limits at my behest
Hmm.
if I'm not willing to lay down limits for me in return, or because of other things where maybe I need to take accountability.
So with that, one of the things I know we both see a lot is people that will sit and be, quote, and I put quotes around it because it's not a thing, long suffering while their
Submissive.
spouse just spews venom all over them for like an hour and a half or something horrible. Like that's not being long suffering. That's just enabling sinful, harsh behavior. So what we tell people is, you get one or two sentences and then, hey, I love you. This isn't how we treat each other. Let's talk later when we can both be calm. And that's the boundary. You get one or two sentences of vile stuff and then it's over. or if you sense the conversation heading that way, just sense it like, hey, maybe we should take a break for a bit, so you have a boundary around, how the communication is going, because it's like a toothpaste tube. You squeeze that stuff out, you ain't getting it back in. So, when you talk about limits for ourselves, that's, I like to be in the driver's seat of that stuff.
Who doesn't?
Right. Yeah. And honestly, I love it when my husband says, hey, let's take a break. Even, and I'm not aware because that happens once in a while, not very often anymore, but it's useful to have those because you don't want to put something in the relationship that's destructive.
Right. Well, and we learn to the patterns and the characteristics of our partners and the things that when we see these things happening or we hear particular words or things,
Mhm.
we know that that needs to be a sign to us that a courageous conversation needs to occur.
Yeah.
And so we can begin that process, by either calling a timeout or bringing it to light. Hey,
Mhm.
let's chat about this. And are you in a place right now where we can do that the
Yeah.
way that we've agreed?
Hmm.
When we see those signs. But sometimes limits for people mean, there's certain language and words that we're not gonna have in our
Hmm.
conversations when it comes to being respected and dignified. Then if we're gonna talk about ways that we better navigate our conflict, then certain habits or patterns from the past may not be allowable or acceptable anymore. I've
Hmm.
never been a big name caller, but apparently there are a lot of people, once
Yeah.
they get angry, even with their spouse, they use some of the most horrible, vile terminology in referring to them that you can imagine. And always at the end, it's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Well,
You
yeah,
said it.
yeah, said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be accountable for what you say.
I was just
And
thinking about that. And I was going to ask you about this because people will say they don't like the behavior and they don't know what to do when it happens to them. And I'm like, well, that's an exit moment,
yeah.
or it's, let's try this again, and have a take two, and you can apologize for that thing because, whoa, that hurts or whatever, how, and if you're calm, which a lot of people are not calm when they're called names, depending on the name. So, what is it? Like, what's your recommendation when somebody starts doing that? What's a limit that's reasonable?
Well, always pausing on purpose. I mean, that's the right to defer
Hmm.
and the right to say, the emotional intensity of this situation has gotten to the point that it is no longer productive. And if we're not being productive in the conversation that we're having, then we're better to leave it for a little bit later.
Hmm.
Always, of course, with the understanding that we'll set an appointment so that nobody
Yeah.
just kind of forgets that it was agreed upon that we come back. Because if it is important enough that people are going to get that emotional about it, then it's important enough to come back to.
So, with people who start conversations like this, like I would think that a limit would be okay, we're not doing this now, like right out of the gate. Like if there's one, that's too
Yes,
many. Would
yes,
you agree with that? Okay.
yeah,
All
because
right.
that's very indicative of the direction of the conversation
Yeah.
when it just happens once. Typically, that ship has sailed, so to
Harsh
speak.
startup.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one you talked about was assertiveness in advocating for needs. What do you mean by that?
Uh, Sometimes we have to take initiative, and we have to be honest and courageous about the things that need to be discussed and how we feel about them and how they impact us. And a lot of people, I think, prioritize the needs of others in order to avoid conflict rather than being assertive about
Mhm.
their own feelings and needs.
Yeah.
And it's not noble, folks. It is not noble to avoid conflict by prioritizing someone else's needs all the time or time and
Mhm.
time again. That's not a noble pastime. But it is very popular amongst those who don't understand the dynamics of conflict and how it's actually needed to get things done. It's needed to change things that need to change.
Well,
And
and I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I just to finish that thought. Once we understand the dynamics of conflict and appropriate confrontation, oh, can we say confrontation without giving a trigger warning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, and that's why I've gone to the term courageous conversation,
Yeah.
because people hear the word conversation, confrontation, and I'm out.
Right.
Didn't sign up for this. I don't do confrontation or windows. So I'm leaving, the conversation at least, and maybe more. But when we prioritize, when we're setting a boundary, it needs to be prioritizing needs that we have. And so to get people's attention and to get them to the place of accepting that we have this need requires sometimes some assertion. That just means being willing to talk about what I need or want and doing it with respect
Hmm.
and doing it in a way that is productive rather than destructive. And often when we're talking about what we want or need with the person that can give us that, we're having that conversation because they have been a part of creating a dynamic or a feeling or an environment that causes us to not feel respected or dignified.
Hmm. If
So
we
that's where the
don't,
being assertive comes in.
if we don't do something, like if we keep avoiding conflict, we're teaching someone else to become more sensitive,
Yeah,
and we're fostering resentment eventually within ourselves because human beings can only handle so much of throwing themselves under buses.
absolutely. And it
Yeah.
also creates a prime runway for a bully to step in.
Mm.
So avoiding is never the answer to making things better.
Well, and if you have kids, it teaches them that one person in the relationship matters and everybody else does not.
Yeah,
So respectful confrontation, conversation, courageous, respectful conversation.
that's right.
Yeah, is really, really important. Otherwise, people, expect zero courageous conversation or, pushback or whatever you want to call it, or awareness of other people on the planet, and you're just fostering more selfishness.
Yeah,
It's not good.
not a bit.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a cool one. Now, you talked about changing patterns of behavior, how people hate that. Yeah. So talk more about that if you would, sir.
Well, we may have been referred to on an occasion or two as creatures of habit.
Hmm.
And so when someone intentionally goes about the process of changing behaviors or changing habits or established patterns, is what we want to say, it is almost always going to be met with some level of resistance or pushback. And when that's the case, as a matter of fact, when I talk with my clients about boundaries and setting boundaries, I said there are two things that you can rest assured you're going to need to deal with when you set a boundary with somebody else. The first one is that they're not going to like it and they're going to resist and push back. The
Hmm.
second one is you're going to probably have to repeat the boundary because it is an established pattern. So is the behavior of the other individual. And they may just go back to the old behavior because it's what's comfortable or their mind takes them there, or they may be pushing back to see if you mean what you say.
Hmm. That's a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when anytime we want to change things, and I wish we had the ability to do the graphics here because I have a model that I think is fabulous for this conversation and a lot of others as well. And it goes through the progression of change of any kind, positive or negative,
Hmm.
is going to lead to some level of chaos. Even
Yeah.
good changes create
Yes.
chaos.
Yes.
And it is in the chaos that we find ourselves in conflict.
Hmm.
And when the conflict occurs, then requires the need for that courageous conversation. But the breaking the established patterns, stopping the way things have always been and saying they need to be different, parts of them need to be new, is what people resist. And they probably don't even recognize how strongly they resist it or how badly they don't want to make a change,
Oh, yeah.
until someone asks them to. And then it's like, oh, wow, I haven't really thought that that would be necessary. But when they do dig in with us, then sometimes the breaking of patterns and the breaking of chains is what occurs.
Hmm.
And it is one of the most critical dynamics of boundary setting and moving forward in a positive way in relationships that are in need.
Well, and I see people that are new at setting boundaries and trying to impact a behavior change for themselves and their partner, struggling themselves with putting it together and being consistent with, the whole I'm going to do this thing differently because it's new to them too.
Yeah.
And I found for myself when I started not participating in heated conversations when I was emotional or someone else was, like I had zero tolerance for that for myself or someone else. I would notice my zero tolerance was like, well, I apparently let like 17 things just happen and I participated in 12 of them.
Yeah.
So much for zero. But you work your way up into that, I think. And eventually it becomes a thing. But I have several people that implemented the zero tolerance for emotional conversation thing. And it was lovingly done. I love you. Let's take a break from this conversation right now. Hundreds of times before their spouse was like, well, you ain't going to talk to me anyway, because I'm mad about this right now. So I'll talk to you when I'm settled down.
Mm-hmm.
But hundreds of times of, calling a timeout before they were respected enough or believed or got it right and all this, like all the pieces, the planets aligned finally. Hundreds of conversations later, you got to stick with this stuff
Yes.
for behavior change to occur.
Yes. This is
That's
work.
it is work. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we make the mistake of saying, okay, here's the way things are now. And I don't have anything against Pentecostals. I wish this was true, but I didn't speak that into existence. We no longer speak to each other like this. Boom. And then the next thing you know, you're speaking to each other like that because
Yeah.
you've always done it. We can't, it takes work, to your point.
Yeah. Some things are so deeply ingrained, not just because of the relationship we're in, but because of the relationships we've seen.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
we just we're a continuance of what we grew up watching and
Yeah.
seeing. That is, whether for good or for bad, the greatest example of how to be an adult, how to be a parent, how to be a spouse that we have are the interactions of our parents.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of them that have just blazed a trail and set a phenomenal example for their children. And then there are just as many, if not more, who never thought for a second about what they were doing and what they were,
Hmm.
you know, ingraining into the minds and the behaviors of the children that would one day become just like them.
Yeah. That's a thing for
Yeah.
sure. And we started sliding into this next point that you mentioned about consistency. We
Work.
need to practice and work and then maintain that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Don't think that because you lay a boundary down and you have an intelligent, well prepared, intentional, loving conversation about it, that's it. Okay, I did the hard part. No, that's actually, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's probably easier than maintaining that boundary because
Hmm.
now you have to call timeouts when you see that it's not being recognized.
Right.
Now you have to call timeouts when you see somebody stepping over the line
Hmm.
and say, Before we go there, I just want to gently remind you about the conversation that we had." And this feels very normal and very regular in the way things have been, and I really want to encourage us to make it different.
I have somebody that's close to me, a friend of mine, who was trying to implement this stuff in her marriage and the whole zero tolerance thing, huge, started working, but they'd get in a car, and that's when he'd let her have it, right? And she finally realized she doesn't have to do that. So she got out of her car at a stoplight, crossed 4 lanes of traffic, and then vanished and ignored him for like 2 hours and took an Uber home. And oh my goodness, like I think that made a point. Like it never happened again after that. Like it was a big consequence, I guess,
Yeah.
or outcome. I don't know what there should be a word for that when you execute a boundary. Like I don't know what that's called, but that's what I've been calling it. So the
Like it
action.
is a consequence. That's a word that we
Okay.
give only a negative connotation to, but a consequence is whatever it consequence is the action or the reaction from the equal action, whatever the
Hmm.
scientific thing is. But a consequence is just cause and effect.
Hmm.
Okay. The effect of the cause is the consequence, whether
Hmm.
it's good or bad.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was one there, and it did lead to, I am certain, further discussions, not in a car.
Right.
But that's frightening to me because that just screams of somebody that needs a captive audience
Hmm.
and believes that that environment creates that, and he or she can say whatever they want, do whatever they want. The other person is locked in, can't get away, no matter. But that's not necessarily true. Now, um,
Exactly.
but they weren't going 70 miles an hour when she chose to step out. But
Or in
um,
the middle of the Nevada desert, you know.
yeah, yeah, that could have been I really regret this decision. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that we all have to say sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof.
But but yeah, that
Yes.
fourth point is just that, understanding that the practice and the consistency, allowing things to happen sometimes and not sometimes is not okay. Okay.
Hmm.
That is never the answer to whatever caused the need to set the boundary to begin with. That is never the answer. It's never the solution. It only creates usually the need to go back and set that boundary again.
Hmm.
Because when others see that, that they've pushed back a bit to see if we're gonna hold on and hold fast to that boundary, and then we don't, then as far as they're concerned, it never happened.
I'm thinking of kids, right? And they just try to wear you down.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Can I have it? Can I have it? Can I have it? And you're in the grocery store and they want candy or something like that. And they're just hounding the ever loving tar out of you. And I had a hounder. Well, they all hound, but I had one that was like he got a PhD in hounding. He was so good at it. And the mother of one of his friends called me one time. She's like, "You've got to tell him he can't come over here if he keeps hounding me." And I said, "No, I don't. That's your job because he ain't bugging me when he's at your house."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, what do I do?" I said, "Send him home. Tell him no once. And if he asks you again, send him home. He's
Hmm.
really smart. He'll never do it again. If you just, on that second time, just boom." She's like, "Oh, I don't know. I can do that." I said, "Then don't complain to me about the incessant hounding you're getting because you're teaching him that it works.
That's
This is
right.
not my problem. This is your problem." But it's true. We get worn out from saying no. But really, if we just approach it like it's the first time, and then it's the first time, his mercies are new every morning. Like, let's just be that patient, and eventually they give up.
Yeah,
So,
that is true.
so you had some sub points you wanted to add to this today.
I did. I just, I kind of want to leave everybody with, you usually ask me, is there anything you'd want to leave us with? And so
Hmm.
I'm always ready, except when I'm not. Today I happen to be ready.
Awesome.
And just the things that setting boundaries requires. Okay. And the first one is self-awareness, knowing that you need to set the boundary, understanding that the bad thing that you feel or the bad thing that happens over and over and over again can only be stopped by someone saying enough. And it need there's a way to go about doing it. And that's kind of what we're talking about is that the process of setting boundaries and how to do them and make them stick. So self-awareness is something, and assertiveness. And this is something a lot of us really struggle with. Not me, but a lot of people
Hmm.
struggle with being assertive.
Hmm.
And that is just stepping forward to say, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what I don't like, this is what bothers me, this is how I feel when that happens. But again, instead of saying that, we'll do anything not to rock the boat and end up avoiding the conflict, and nothing ever changes. And then the resentment steps in because it's not fair.
Yep. So true.
So being self-aware, being assertive, and then being resilient.
Mm,
Setting boundaries requires resiliency because you do have to come back time and time and time again to reaffirm, to reassess, to readdress. A lot of re's happening there. And I love a re. I love anything that starts with re because it means a second chance.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
we should talk about that one day, by the way.
Oh, amen.
But so understand resiliency and strength. If we go about setting boundaries from you know a standpoint of a weak-willed milk toast, and somebody that is so meek and so mild that they say, well, if you didn't mind, it would be really good if you could, no, 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 that's not assertive. And you're not going to be resilient with that.
Right.
That's something that you had to work so hard to do one time. The likelihood of ever having to come back and discuss it again is very slim.
Hmm.
So be self-aware, be assertive, and be resilient.
Love that.
Those
Love
go
that.
a long way.
Yeah. Very true. Insightful. Good stuff there, Kyle. Thank you so much. Y'all, you got to dig into this. If you live in Texas and you want to like get into the nitty gritty of your life and figure out how to make this happen, you need to contact Kyle. You can get to him at headway.co/providers/Kyle-Hargrove. That's in the write-up on this. So you'll see that particular address. So you can go connect with him. But you got to live in Texas because that's where he's licensed.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. It's a big state though, y'all. We have got a
It
lot of
is.
listeners in Texas. So
It is.
there's
Also,
that.
let me add to that.
Yeah, yeah.
I can be reached at Kyle Hargrove LPC at gmail.com.
Oh, there you go.
So
That's
don't
maybe
hesitate to
easier.
use that one as well.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so and then feel free to pop over to that little subscribe button. If you're watching this on YouTube, grab that. It makes you hear the rest of the things and hit the next episode. We're going to be dealing with conflict things again to
Yeah.
help you change your Christian marriage. And if you want to pop over to our website, greaterimpact.org, there's some free resources for you. So thanks for being here today, and we'll see you in the next podcast and video.